It was always meant to be yours." The words, delivered with a chilling sweetness that curdled the air in my kitchen, hit me with the force of a physical blow. I looked at my sister, Clara, across the worn oak table, her eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, now holding a smug, almost pitying glint. My son, Leo, only 6, was oblivious, happily smearing jam on his toast, his small world still intact. It was a Tuesday morning, ordinary in every way until that moment. The sun, a pale winter wash, slanted through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air, a quiet witness to the unraveling of my carefully constructed piece. My life before Clara's pronouncement felt like a muted watercolor, soft edges and predictable hues. My husband, Mark, was a steady presence, his quiet strength a balm to my often anxious spirit. Leo was our sunshine, a boisterous, curious child who filled our small house with laughter. I worked part-time as a graphic designer, creating beautiful things for others, a skill I'd honed through years of quiet persistence. Clara, on the other hand, was a tempest. Always chasing the next big thing, the next man, the next lucrative scheme, she'd burned through more than her fair share of opportunities and people. We were sisters by blood, but by nature, we were galaxies apart. Our mother, bless her soul, had always tried to bridge the gap, to foster a sisterly bond that never quite materialized. Clara's presence in my life was a recurring, low-grade fever, something I learned to manage, to compartmentalize, to ignore until it flared up. I remembered the summer Leo was born. I was recovering from a difficult C-section, still weak and overwhelmed, when Clara swept in, unannounced. She'd brought a designer stroller, an ostentatious thing I couldn't afford, and a knowing smile. "Just wanted to make sure Leo had the best start," she'd purred, her eyes scanning my modest nursery with thinly veiled disdain. Later, she'd casually mentioned how much that stroller had cost, the exact figure, down to the penny, as if to highlight the vast gulf between our financial realities. It wasn't about the stroller, it was about control, about reminding me of her perceived superiority. Another time, during a family dinner, she'd cornered me, her voice a low hiss, about a modest inheritance our grandmother had left me. "You're just sitting on it, aren't you?" she'd accused. "Not anything with it. Such a waste." She'd always been like this, a connoisseur of subtle digs, a master of making me feel inadequate. She'd borrow money with no intention of repayment, hint at lavish trips she couldn't afford, and generally operate under the assumption that my life, my resources, were somehow her collective property, to be accessed and utilized at her whim. Each instance, a tiny shard of glass under my skin, unnoticed by the outside world, but felt keenly by me. The incident itself unfolded with a brutal, almost cinematic slowness. Leo had been invited to Clara's for a weekend playdate. She lived in a sprawling, sterile house an hour away, a place that always felt more like a showroom than a home. Mark and I had been planning a small, private celebration for Leo's upcoming birthday, a treasure hunt in our backyard, a cake I'd painstakingly designed. It was meant to be a surprise. Clara, however, had a different idea of surprises. I'd picked Leo up on Sunday evening, and he was unusually quiet, his eyes red-rimmed. He clutched a tattered stuffed bear, not his usual worn-out favorite, but one I'd never seen before. When I asked him what was wrong, he just shook his head, tears welling up. Clara said, he'd whispered, his voice trembling, she said, "My birthday is going to be different this year." She said, she's going to give me her own party. With a big, big cake. And she said you'd be there, but maybe you wouldn't have any presents for me anymore. My blood ran cold. I looked at Clara, who had followed us to the door, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching me with an almost bored amusement. "What did you tell him, Clara?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. She shrugged, her gaze flicking over me dismissively. "Oh, just a little white lie. Trying to drum up some excitement for party." He was so confused when I told him about the amazing presents had planned. You know how kids get, always wanting the biggest and best. "I just thought I'd help him along. He'll forget all about your little treasure hunt." Honestly, it's rather quaint, isn't it? quaint. My son's joy, my meticulously planned surprise, reduced to a quaint afterthought. Clara's words dripped with a casual cruelty, a complete disregard for the emotional fallout. She hadn't just invited Leo to her house, she had weaponized his innocence, planting seeds of doubt and insecurity about his own mother. She'd taken his trust, something precious and fragile, and twisted it into a tool for her twisted amusement, all under the guise of helping him along. The smugness on her face, the way she casually dismissed my efforts, my love, my son's feelings, it was the final, irrevocable severing of any remaining familial ties. The air thickened, charged with a silent, devastating fury that had been building for years. The next morning, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I brewed my coffee, the same routine as always, but with a newfound, icy resolve. I opened my laptop, not to design graphics, but to access my emails. For months, I'd been quietly gathering information. Not out of spite, but out of a growing, primal need for protection. Clara had a habit of overextending herself, of making grand gestures without the substance to back them up. I'd seen the warning signs in her increasingly frantic calls about overdue bills, the vague mentions of investment opportunities that sounded suspiciously like scams. I'd started a separate savings account years ago, a rainy day fund, I'd told Mark. It had slowly grown, funded by the occasional bonus and careful budgeting. But it was also the account that received the small, regular payments I'd made on our mortgage, the ones that were supposed to be split evenly. Clara, in her characteristic entitlement, had always assumed the house was a joint venture, that she'd contributed just as much as I had, despite living 2 hours away and never having paid a single penny towards its upkeep or mortgage. She'd even casually referred to it as our family home, on occasion, a statement that always made my teeth clench. I found the original mortgage documents, the proof of ownership, and painstakingly scanned every single payment I'd made, detailing every deposit, every transfer. I then drafted a concise, formal letter. It wasn't accusatory, it was factual. It outlined my sole ownership of the property, the absence of any financial contribution from Clara, and the legal basis for her eviction. I attached the scanned evidence. I then sent the letter, not to Clara directly, but to the lawyer who handled our parents' estate, a man I knew to be scrupulously honest and efficient. I also included a separate, equally concise letter to Clara, informing her that her access to the property would be terminated as of the end of the week. I didn't ask for explanations. I didn't offer compromises. The moment she realized was almost comical, if it hadn't been born from such deep-seated betrayal. It was Thursday evening. Clara, no doubt expecting a frantic call from me, or perhaps a pathetic plea, arrived at my doorstep with a forced smile and a bottle of expensive wine. She expected to be welcomed, to perhaps gloat about Leo's supposed excitement for her party, to bask in the reflected glory of her perceived generosity. Instead, she found the house locked. A new deadbolt, a subtle but formidable barrier, had been installed on the front door that morning. I watched from the upstairs window as her confusion morphed into disbelief, then into a chilling, dawning horror. Her phone, I knew, would be buzzing with frantic calls from the lawyer, explaining the legal ramifications, the finality of her situation. I saw her fumble with her phone, her face paling with each passing second. The smugness had vanished, replaced by a raw, naked panic. She was accustomed to being the one in control, the one pulling the strings. To have those strings so expertly, so calmly, severed was a shock she clearly wasn't equipped to handle. She stood there for a long time, a solitary figure against the backdrop of my quiet home, the weight of her own actions finally crashing down upon her. The fallout was exactly as I anticipated. Clara's text started almost immediately, a torrent of indignant outrage, interspersed with desperate pleas for explanations. They were sent to me, to Mark, and, predictably, to our extended family. The flying monkeys were swift and predictable. My aunt, bless her well-meaning but misguided heart, called, her voice laced with concern and thinly veiled accusations. "Honey, Clara's devastated. She just wanted to do something nice for Leo. You're being too harsh." Harsh? For protecting my son? For reclaiming what was mine? My cousin, ever the pragmatist, messaged, "Is there any way to smooth this over? Clara's financial situation is precarious. This could really impact her." Of course, it could. That was precisely the point. Clara's social and financial ruin wasn't an accident, it was the carefully orchestrated consequence of her own consistent pattern of deceit and entitlement. She had burned my son's innocence, and in doing so, she had ignited her own downfall. Her pleas for my forgiveness, her pronouncements of how much she loved Leo, rang hollow, mere echoes of the lies she'd so readily employed. She was ostracized by many, her reputation tarnished not by my actions, but by the transparent revelation of her true character. She had banked on my silence, on my willingness to absorb her toxicity indefinitely. She had miscalculated. The silence that followed was profound. No more dramatic entrances, no more veiled insults, no more manipulative phone calls. The space she'd occupied, a constant drain on my emotional energy, was now blessedly empty. It was a quiet, almost sterile peace, but it was mine. The satisfaction wasn't in her suffering, but in the absolute certainty of my own strength. I hadn't sought revenge, I'd simply corrected an imbalance, drawing a firm, unyielding line in the sand. My son, oblivious to the storm that had raged around him, was slowly beginning to heal, his trust in his mother reaffirmed. Clara had sought to destroy my son's precious secret, to shatter his innocent joy with her own selfish brand of manipulation. Instead, she had inadvertently revealed her own rotten core, and in doing so, she had destroyed herself. The quiet justice was in the undisturbed peace of my own home, and the knowing, unshakable calm in my own heart.